If not, and you want to give it a shot, then I'm inviting you to stay with me for about 90 minutes. If you can hang with that. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. I'm going to need some type of indicator when you can't, because I think my signal has not been strong all day. My internet signal, that is. My brain waves are working okay, but the internet signal is not that strong today. I don't know why. So if you start to lose me, again, internet wise, just let me know something. Show me something. All right. So I'm not gonna like continue going with the madness. Okay. All right. Well, we have an agenda for this evening. Imagine that. And some exciting things planned. It's a rather ambitious agenda. And I know that with the amount of time that Dr. Shanman spent last week on the Learn Unit, maybe the last thing you want to see is Learn Unit review on the agenda. But obviously, since it's such an important piece of really your learning moving forward, I need to make sure that you get the Learn Unit on the Learn Unit, so to speak. So I am kind of, I guess, asking you to be able to declare tonight that you have had an identifiable Learn Unit for yourself, an aha moment, something that you can tangibly see a natural fracture of learning for yourself. I need you to be able to get a couple of concepts either more concretely after this evening, or even new concepts that you haven't really thought about. Um, I really think it's important for you to leave the session tonight with that kind of sensation. Um, with that said, I think from here on out, there's going to be a little bit of a shift from less teacher directed to more student directed, because you're going to start bringing in your data and having those conversations. And there's going to get to be a point of the entire semester that everything gets flipped and you're going to be doing most of the presenting. I think that you're going to have a much better experience doing that when these basic fundamental pieces are automatic for you. And that's really why I want to spend the time this evening on, I think, a few really important pieces that I really want to get across to you. So just bear with me with that. I'm going to kind of do a little review with you throughout, and you're not going to know when it's coming, but um, what I want you to be able to do is, okay, I want you to be able to respond in the chat window when I ask these questions. All right. So I'm going to ask the first one now, and I'll actually write it in the chat window. So all right, so it's going to kind of be fill in the blanks for this one. The dynamic nature of teaching requires 4 components: the learned repertoire, the curriculum, the teacher, and the what. This is from chapter 1. The dynamic nature of teaching requires 4 components: the learned repertoire, the curriculum, the teacher, and the fill in the blank here. Excellent, excellent. Student, pupil, learner, individual. It could be an adult, also child, whatever. All right, good, excellent. All right, so far so good. Let's keep moving along here. Last week, when I know you guys covered the Learn Unit, Dr. Shinman talked to you about the difference between a learn unit and a discrete trial. And so can anyone tell me, without typing it, so we don't have to waste that much time, your understanding of that difference? And it's okay right now if everyone doesn't understand that, all right? But can someone give me their version? Because there's some similarities, but there's some differences also. Can someone volunteer to guess?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Bring it.
So one aspect of the learn unit consists of interaction, and discrete trial consists of the process.
Okay, I like that, Cece. I totally get what you're saying. All right.
That was from Dr. Shanman.
All right. Well, good. I'm glad that you got that from Shane Man. All right. Okay. So who else wants to contribute to that?
Can I take a shot at it?
Absolutely.
The discrete trial is a lot more scripted,
Okay.
and it's harder. It can be harder to generalize the skills across environments and across people. Whereas a learn unit, we might have like a program, say, like some learn units can be scripted, but we try to get them more naturally in the environment as well.
I heard that. And so far we are doing a bang up job, because everything that you talked about is definitely important. All right, anybody else?
I have one more thing, or you can go ahead.
Go ahead.
All of that too, and then I was just looking back at my notes from last week, and also, so we listed in our discussion, we had kind of listed the different components of each, and a lot of it's the same, but one of the things that stands out is you know, a learn unit is an effective predictor of learning, and while a discrete trial could also be an effective predictor of learning, it's not always, because it doesn't necessarily have all of the components that a learn unit has to have.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, Lauren. Very, very good. All right, what else? I'm hearing there's a kind of a fever pitch of information here.
The consequence in a discrete trial, the consequence procedure kind of predicts the behavior that's going to happen. It starts to predict it.
Okay.
Remember, we kind of discussed something like it starts to drive the behavior forward a lot more.
Well, I think that you want the consequence in the learn unit to be able to do that, right? You want the consequence to select out the behavior, right? Okay, so that might apply to both, okay? Anything else?
Basically, one of the things we said, and Laura was kind of going there. Basically, learning is a requirement of the learn unit.
Oh, that gave me the goosebumps, Tanya, when you said that.
No, that was directly like her from Dr. Sharman. That wasn't me.
Well, hey, I think that's a really good point. I did want to share this with you guys kind of in the midst of this conversation. There's a thesis that was done at the University of North Texas, and I think Taylor talked about naturalistic things, and the learn unit is simply just an identification of learning. And Amanda did a really good job of looking at that in her thesis. And that could be something that I send to you guys. Let's see if I can find a way to put it in the chat. And I'll send it to you also. Well, that's not very helpful. It's not cooperating with me right now, but it will. I'm trying to be a very patient man today. All right. And I think that there's a lot that you can glean from this write-up here. And I think it will expand your horizons a little bit. All right. So let's kind of, does anybody else have anything to contribute to that? I just want to make sure I'm not cutting off anybody.
Actually, Dr. Gosher, I put this in the discussion box, but I'm sort of saying it, but asking, can
Sure.
discrete trial be looked at as parts of a whole, or like you're like
Okay.
sort of errorless training or something like one? Okay, one.
You could
Okay,
have
one
an
thing.
errorless learn unit. You can, because at that point, the learn unit is really about the child participating, right? That's where the learn unit is, not necessarily about the response to the question. But I do think that what you said about maybe one way to look at it is that for some types of learn units, a discrete child might be nested in it for some types, all right, but not for all types, because let me kind of present this scenario here. If I'm teaching a high school English class and I have vetted that my learners have the prerequisites to respond to this antecedent, and the antecedent is compare and contrast the main character in Taming of the Shrew and the main character in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and include at least 3 critical attributes of both. All right. That sounds like a common question that could be asked in a high school literature class, right? Like, I don't have 3 heads when I ask that question. So the responses, so that's your antecedent. You're going to get some responses, and at some point, those responses will get consequated. So for the most part, I'll be able to count the learn units after it's all said and done, right? Because I'm going to see how those responses fit into my expectations of what those responses need to look like for where the learners are. And I'm going to consequate that appropriately. So I can go back, and it might be that if I'm going to use this class for an example, that maybe Kayla's learn units are related to her sentence structure and the accuracy of the character development. But maybe for Cece's, it might have to do with extending that character development to include personification or something like that. If I'm really good at figuring out where my learners are, I can get that detailed, right? So I can take what I just assigned and identify the learn units for the class, for each child, and so on. Does everybody follow me right now? All right. Those learn units might be in written form. They might be in speaker form. I may ask them to illustrate this using dramatic play. They may have to do an art project. The modality won't matter. The response topography won't necessarily matter, provided I'm able to determine for each of those topographies, what are the learn units, right? Where's the learner coming in? What do I expect them to achieve? And did they do that under these circumstances? So I think that we can all figure out where the learn units might be, but no one would argue that there are any discrete trials in there, right? Right. And so think of the learn unit as a unit of measurement that can apply to any type of teaching at all. It does not matter whether that teaching comes from Tanya or from Lauren or from Jessica, whether that teaching comes from the student themselves, sometimes a computer program, another student, the paraprofessional, the environment in general, it does not matter. But there are some things that do matter. Now, if I ask all of you right now to point to coffee cup, all right, I've had a very clear antecedent. Okay, Kristen, point to coffee cup. All right, okay. You got it, Kristen. That is a coffee cup. I love coffee. I drink it all the time. That is why I'm so wired. Woohoo! All right. That's a discrete trial for Kristen, right? I had a clear antecedent. I had a response. I consequated that response. Does everybody agree with me that the components of the discrete trial were there? Yes or no? All right. But was that a learn unit for Kristen? That's my question.
No, because it wasn't based on her previous
Yes,
studying and
that's
all
right.
that.
That's right.
knowledge.
Because I do believe strongly, whether even though I don't have evidence to support this, that Kristen knew what the freaking coffee cup was to start off with, right? So there was no learning involved. And when there's no learning, there is no learn unit because the learner didn't learn anything. All right. So you want to go from, and this is what we call about talk about in terms of a natural fracture. If she wouldn't know what this was, and I was presenting her with competing stimuli, and you're finding all the things that are on my desk right now, and I know before, based on evidence, that she could not point to any type of cup. And as we're going through the program, she gets one right. And then the next time it gets presented, she gets another one right. And then she might get a couple wrong. Then she gets 5 right in a row. Then all of a sudden, the operant has formed. When I say coffee cup, she's only pointing to this and not to bottle of sleeping pills and not to, my yoga teacher gave me this, some kind of dong or something, I don't know. And she's not doing that, right? So then I know the learn unit has formed. That was the natural fracture that has occurred because I could pinpoint exactly when Kristen went from coffee cup clueless to coffee cup mastered, right? But that would be an example in that case that maybe the discrete trial and the learn unit were one and the same because it ticked the boxes, right? But if I don't kind of make sure that I can analyze all those pieces, I may be only delivering a discrete trial. And I say only not to downplay it. Sometimes discrete trials are important. We use them to maybe get a learner back on track when it's learned material. We use them maybe to probe, to find out where the learner is. We use them maybe in mass trials when they just can't get that one thing in a set, and so on. It's a tactic, right? But it in and of itself, as a standalone, it's not a learn unit. So you could, I mean, there are probably different ways you could think about it. Maybe the learn unit is an extended version of a discrete trial. Maybe the learn unit is requires a larger response size. You have to analyze more parts of the environment. But I do know that more discrete trials doesn't always result into the same outcomes as more learn units for a child. So think about this with Kristen's example. If all period long tonight, I'm asking Kristen to point to that coffee cup, and she already had it in her repertoire, and she gave me 200 responses of pointing to that coffee cup. I had more opportunities to respond, but only to a discrete trial. And that did not advance Kristen's skill set. However, if she didn't know what the coffee cup was and she got it, and then we added a cell phone and we added a flashlight and we added a pair, then at the end of that session, maybe 200 learn units would have resulted in the acquisition of 5 new targets. So that's why the increase in learn units is the main predictor of learning and good teaching. And it will reduce aberrant behavior. Because if I keep Kristen going, her correct responses result in more reinforcement. And more reinforcement for appropriate behavior will lead to less reinforcement for inappropriate behavior. So that is why the first tactic you want to use for aberrant behavior is making sure you have enough learn units running in that classroom. It might not cure all the ills, but from someone that's been doing this for a long time, it cures, I'm using that term loosely, it addresses 90% of them. So then you could spend the rest of your time on the 10% that we just can't figure out. And we used to say, Dr. Cohen used to tell us this all the time. We used to say that the child's not learning from the learn unit when that would happen. But Dr. Cohen corrected us and said, oh no, it means you really didn't have a learn unit in place, because if you would have had one, they would have learned from it. So that was kind of a shift in how we analyze things. And I think that's an important conversation to be had. So understand the power of the learn unit, because every scientifically sound discipline has a unit of measurement and a unit of analysis that you can plug in to anything. You can go in anywhere, any type of business. You could go into a bank. What is that teller supposed to be doing? Right now, they're supposed to be accurately counting that money to deposit the same amount. I could count the learn units that are right there. I need to find out what their supervisor is supposed to be doing. I could count the learn units their supervisor is doing. So it's a uniform measure of determining what is happening with human behavior and likely other types of behavior. So first of all, before we dive into another exercise with the learn unit, was that conversation helpful to you, or do I have you more lost than ever before? Don't be afraid to tell me that. I know what I can do to people, all right? And you just have to be honest with me, okay? All right, Kayla, you good? Okay, all right. And so, you know, we have about 50-50 in here in terms of SPED teachers and clinical people. And a lot of times I'll hear this rhetoric that kind of sends me spinning. So the SPED teachers will tell me, but that just applies to clinical settings. And the clinical people tell me, but that just applies to special education settings. I'm like, so that's not really possible if you're pointing the fingers at each other, okay? We're talking about arranging the environment to maximize learning. And in my simplistic head, that applies to every setting, no matter what, because I think it's all of our jobs to teach kids as much as what we can in the best way possible. And that's why the measurement is important, because otherwise you are just hypothetically determining if a child has learned something. There's different ways to measure things, but remember, the learn unit is the least divisible part of measurement, right? And that's why it's so important. All right, I see a question in the chat window, but I'm not sure if possibly jumping ahead. So Taylor, my response to that antecedent is that I know you well enough to know that the answer to that is yes. Okay. However, I am going to give you a go, and that's maybe a way of pushing the agenda, right? So let's keep going. Okay. All right, Taylor, what's your question?
So for the learn unit to be present, there has to be learning. So when looking at like a mastered concept, why, if we want to continue something, we go to rate instead of saying make.
Okay, good question. Good question. All right. And it's okay if everybody is not there yet with that question. So you're talking about, there's different types of mastery, right? And with rate, we're talking about mastery through fluency. And typically speaking, and Skinner has said this on numerous occasions, fluency is the best predictor of mastery. Right? It's not the only predictor, but it is a very strong one. And the reason why you want to move it to rate, to make sure that a kid can do it accurately and quickly, is because that definitely extends what they've learned under a whole different set of conditions, right? So that's why you have to count the learn unit differently. And this was part of one of my little review questions. So if you're teaching long division for the first time, all right, and there's 4 steps to each part of the division problem, and this is the first time you've taught it, how many learn units are there? 4. All right. Now the child already has the prerequisites. If you're doing long division, they should be able to multiply. If you're doing long division, they should be able to identify numbers. You get what the prerequisites are. But if there are 4 discrete steps, there are 4 learn units there. Once the child has mastered that, that's not the learn unit anymore. The learn unit is maybe the answer to the whole problem, right? Okay, so then we master that. You're not consecrating every step. You're just consecrating the problem. Then once the learn unit, the learner has that done, maybe the learn unit moves to answering so many problems out of so many correctly. Okay. And then after that, the learn unit may move to answering so many problems correctly under a certain amount of time, or within a certain amount of time. In that case, what happens is, think about this, when it's every step to every problem, there's a lot of learn units. Then as the learner becomes more sophisticated, the number of learn units actually goes down because the response size of the learn unit gets bigger. And when the learner is to a point where they're doing it accurately and they need to go quickly, there's only 1 learn unit. So whatever the targets are, if you but through evidence can show that the learner could probably do 10 in a minute, and they do 9 in a minute, then it's 0 correct learn units out of 1. And if they do 12 in a minute, it's 1 correct learn unit out of 1. All right. So what's important to see is the learn unit is a dynamic component and it grows with the learner. And that's why in university settings, it takes longer for the candidates to get learn units because the response size is larger, right? Every word you say is not a learn unit, but for a child who's just speaking, every sound they say may be a learn unit. So that's why for kids with limited repertoires, kids that are emergent speakers, you can't get to sit in a chair, always having to redirect, those kids might need to get 700 learn units a day. And then when you start getting there, then as their verbal behavior evolves and becomes more sophisticated, maybe they need to get 400 learn units a day. And then they start writing and maybe they only need to get 200 learn units a day. And when I say need, what I'm meaning by that is needing that to learn as much as they can to keep up with things. Okay, so did I answer your question, Taylor? Is that an emphatic yes? A semi-enthusiastic yes? Are we better now? Like, do you see a little bit more clearly with that?
No, I do. I
Okay.
see it more clearly.
All right, good. Okay, are you guys ready for another review question? So this is going to go into the chat window. All right, let's do this one. I'll do another short one. All right. Normative education procedures may be referred to as, I'm going to name some things. Normative education: ineffective, pre-scientific, substandard, evidence-based. So when you're hearing normative education, which one of those terms kind of goes with that. Ineffective, pre-scientific, substandard, or evidence-based. This is from chapter 1. All right, pre-scientific. Notice I did not say ineffective. There might be some things that happen that result in you learning for the child. Very well, maybe. The difference is that unless you're looking at it through a scientific lens, you really don't know what was effective. So you kind of have to do the same things over and over. All right, that was review number 2. We are going to shift to a little PowerPointy thingy here. All right. Just bear with me for a second. Get back to that. Okay. All right, I'm going to take you through a short tutorial here. You can read what's on there. That's great. Talked about a lot of these things before. Let's start deconstructing some things. All right. So I'm going to take you through some exemplars. This should illustrate a little bit more about the context of the Learn Unit. Now, I want to ask you this question. In any of your classes, have you seen a diagram of the Learn Unit egg? It looks like an egg. You've seen the egg. All right. So it won't be the first time you're going to see the egg tonight. All right. So again, look at these things and how they're nested into each other. Okay. The flow of this. All right. Okay. We could take that flow apart and look at it this way. Not a big leap right here. So then we have to take that and start to put it in a strategic analysis. And this really aligns with some of the things that you're doing in Dr. Cohane's class. And I would say of all the classes, the class that Dr. Shanman and I are teaching this semester is going to be the one that overlaps the most with a lot of Dr. Cohane's courses. And sometimes that's a blessing and a curse altogether, because a lot of, the strategic analysis courses are pretty involved. And I do think it takes multiple exemplars of it to kind of hit home. So this is where you're getting the multiple exemplars. We have to analyze and isolate the problem by asking the right types of questions. And when we're doing that, we need to relate those questions to principles of behavior. The tactics we choose have to be connected to the principles of behavior, and we need to be able to talk about those things in scientific terms, because successful scientists, no matter what they are, no matter who they are, what they are, do that. Medical doctors talk within the same scientific community, and the words mean the same. When we use scientific terms, it's not because we want to sound difficult or fancy. It's because those words only mean certain things, and they're not like other things. And that's why when we talk about reinforcement, we're not talking about rewards or incentives. And when we talk about rewards or incentives, we're not talking about reinforcement. Those are different things. It allows us to analyze and isolate the Learn Unit. And we then can mediate through the literature. This article talked about motivating operations for language development. And I am doing math. My kids already have language development, but I could take that concept and apply it to a motivating operation that has to do with advanced learners in math. That takes a lot of analysis and verbal mediation to be able to do that. And that leads us to a curricular analysis. We should always be able no matter what we're using as curriculum. If you are, for example, if you are using unique, all right, you should be able to analyze that, all the different parts, and determine what are my antecedents, what are the targeted responses, what am I supposed to consecrate, what are they supposed to have before coming into it? Am I prompting all the answers? Then I must not have the curriculum to match the child at that point. And I could take what I know about the science and level the playing field and fix any faulty components of any curriculum. And sometimes they're not faulty because the curriculum's faulty. They're faulty because they're not matching with what the child needs. Every curriculum would need that type of manipulation to ensure that there are learn units being delivered. So have you guys seen this picture before? All right, want you to get more comfortable with it. All right, really want you to overlay this on anything that's happening in your setting. All right, so here's some common problems with some of the different parts of the learn unit. A lot of times we are dealing with some really difficult phylogenetic issues. And phylogeny has to do with what is that learner bringing to the table in terms of who they are, what were they born with. There are lots of physical and other types of issues that we could be dealing with. And then how do those things interact with their learning environment? All right, so we need to be able to figure out, what do we need to change to deal with that? When you are dealing with a situation where you have a medical interaction, all right, if you're dealing with a situation that when the child comes back from a certain event, that you may have more headaches, or there may be exposed to allergies. You've got to look at, what do you change in the programming that's going to minimize the likelihood of problems. You want to keep the learning going and make sure that you've arranged the environment differently such that you're not going to have any additional problems. So I get this a lot with, it's not necessarily phylogenetic makeup, but I hear things like, oh, when he comes back from spending the weekend with the dad, that first day's just going to be horrible. All right, it's not a phylogenetic problem. That child's not bringing that to the table because they were born that way, but it is a setting event that occurred. And I have to think, so I know that he's with dad this weekend, so I'm going to do something different on Monday. Or mom, it could be, I'm not trying to harp on the dads here, or mom or grandparents or whatever. I want to do something different on that Monday in order to navigate around that, right? Maybe that's when we change the reinforcement system. Maybe that's when we keep the reinforcement system the same. Maybe that's when we lower demands. Maybe that's when, you know, we bring out isolated reinforcers. But we don't do that after the behavior deteriorates. We've analyzed the setting events before, and we've changed things before the child emits the aberrant behavior. Okay, and that's really, really important, to be a step ahead, and the predictive nature of what a setting event analysis allows you to do. And that could be recent or momentary types of things. All right, instructional history. I think that you guys probably spent some time talking about this in Dr. Cohen's class, but when we're analyzing the learn unit, this is the analysis, and there could be more than one piece that is a problem. But when we look at instructional history, you know, we could be dealing with a situation where the learner is in a 5th grade reading class, but is reading on a 1st grade level. Guess what? Those experiences in that reading class, if they're small group instruction or any type of public performance, we could kind of predict where things might go from there, right? They have missing repertoires. What they've learned in the past may be interfering with what they're learning with now. And those things all are real things that come into play, and we have to anticipate those problems. So for a child that is faced with having to do a public performance in reading, and we know that they can't read, we better think of something to do before that becomes the antecedent. And then all of a sudden they start throwing books and we remove them from the classroom because they're being violent. That will form a faulty operant. And we're going to teach that child pretty quickly. Well, all I have to do is rough some things up, and then I get to leave the classroom and I don't have to perform, and people won't realize that I can't read. All right. So we got to think about all those things and arrange the environment differently. So at that point, I do think it's important for that child to be able to work on the prerequisites in a safe environment where people won't tease him or her for doing that. They have to get it, because they won't just acquire fluent reading capability because it falls from the sky. When I'm having that conversation with teachers, I want you to, and I'm not necessarily talking about teachers in this program, but I'll get calls from school districts. Oh God, we have a problem with the kid in reading. It's Mount Vesuvius. So you go in, it's a 5th grade, they're reading on a 1st grade level. They're not able to keep up with the comprehension. At that time, they're probably not doing a lot of reading out loud, but that means the silent reading is even more laborious. So, the teacher's like, they're not learning anything. They're not getting anything out of this. They're spending most of their time in detention, and so on. So then I'm going to come up with well, can we carve out 15 minutes so they could work on basic reading fluency? Oh, no, we can't do that. They have to work on our state standards comment. That's not a state standard for 5th grade. Well, nor is spending all afternoon in detention last time I checked, right? Nor is throwing a book, nor is getting kicked out of the classroom. So I don't think any of those things are addressing the state standards. So I think that there's a reality there that we need to really kind of take a step back and say, I want you to tell me, I want you to say what you told me in a mirror 5 times and look at yourself and try to tell me that this makes any sense at all. So those are real things that we face all the time. All right. A lot of times it's not going to be as easy as just the prerequisite skill. Maybe there is actually no capacity for learning through observation. Maybe there are few observing responses. You know those types of kids. Hey, look here, look at me, track this. Look here, ding, 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 track. And then you're trying to do a lesson on the board. That child is not attending to that. And if you have to have a 3-ring circus to get the child to track stimuli, they're not going to learn diddly squat from being included with their peers, because something's probably aversive with that. And they've actually trained themselves not to pay attention. So that is why you would need some type of protocol to minimize the aversiveness of the observing response and to induce that missing developmental capability. That's very different than teaching a prerequisite skill. I'm not talking about a prerequisite skill. You're talking about developmentally things that typically appear to naturally occur. They've occurred for most of us, but for children, for a variety of reasons, maybe they're from impoverished backgrounds. Maybe they have a native disability that is a barrier to something. It does not matter. But what is great about the science of behavior is we're not at a loss. We could identify developmentally what verbal cusp or capability is not present. And then we can work towards inducing that. Now, it is not a vaccine. Trust me, it is not a one-stop shop. When you actually do something like inducing naming or emergent responding, you sometimes have to revisit what you did to do that from time. You know, there's a reason why the child didn't have those types of emergent responses. But if you do that and you give them opportunities to learn incidentally, once you've induced that capability, you're going to start getting somewhere. And what's important for our people to understand is that secret's not going to be found in the state standards. The standards are written for children who come to the table with every developmental cusp. And I think the piece of the special ed pie that's important to understand is there are no modifications or accommodations that can be put in place to induce that cusp or capability. It can only be done through the implementation of an intervention that serves as a protocol to do that. So giving somebody more time to do something when the problem is that they're going slower and it takes them longer to figure it out is not going to ever help them to learn how to do it quickly. The intervention really needs to be mass practices for going quickly. Now that's not inducing a cusp, but it goes back to that idea of modifications and adaptations are things you do when you have no other idea of how to help that child. Okay? But fortunately, when we are fluent with the science of teaching and learning, which is the science of behavior, we don't have to resort to those things. And that is what you need to try as a legitimate intervention to help a problem. If you think of all of the identifiable verbal behavior protocols that you're learning in Dr. Cohen's class, those are the enriched interventions that the children need, that they can only get from people who are trained to provide those. It might be a language problem, but the SLP is not going to necessarily be trained in these unless they have specific training in them. It might be related to not being able to address the core standards, but the teacher's not going to be able to help induce that unless they have training in how to do these pieces. So that's why it takes a science of behavior to solve educational problems. And it's really important for you to develop that skill set because that's what you're bringing to the table that's going to be different from your colleagues. And that opens the door for the realm of possibility that your children might be able to benefit from that science. And that is what you want to achieve. Even if none of you change the roles you're in right now, your responsibility is to bring the science to that role. And even if your roles do change over time, it's still your responsibility to bring the science to that role. So this slide right here regarding verbal developmental cusp, I think that's where we really have our skin in the game. All right, so that's kind of what I wanted to kind of sum up with the Learn Unit for tonight. I want us to move on to some other things. Let me check the chat window for now. What's in there? How do you work? I think I may have answered that question in my explanation just now. Right. There are some things, Taylor, that because of the phylogenetic history, they need the missing cusp. They need the protocol to induce the missing cusp. That's the only way they're going to get it, because they're not going to get it developmentally because of the phylogenetic component. All right. There's some children, because of the severity of the phylogenetic component, you might have to do that 1,000,000 times to keep them in the ballgame. And then there's some kids, because of the severity of the phylogenetic history, that our science just has not developed all of the protocols to use to address those cusps, right? I mean, when you look at the research that our group has done, okay, it's really only since, I would say, 2004 that we are having these conversations. And I know for some of you young'uns, that seems like a long time ago, but for me, it seems like it was last year, trust me. So it, that was a line in the sand in terms of our research track, right? And boy, have we published quite a bit of research in those areas. And I mean, for those of you that follow Dr. Greer's research, you guys know that in 2016, they did an analysis of the most published authors in the area of verbal behavior development since the beginning of time. And Dr. Greer was number one in that area. And were you guys aware of that? Did you guys see that article? I think that's important because obviously that drives a lot of the things that we do in this program. I'll take a short sidebar. Any questions up to this point on what we've talked about? Why don't we do this before we transfer to the next topic, which will be outcomes and principles. Let's do another question. And then let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back, let's say right at 6 o'clock, and then try to barrel through some of the other components, okay? We're gonna do another question. Let's do a true false. Individualized instruction can occur in a one-to-one and group settings. Is that true or false? All right, that is true. Feeling more and more confident every second. Let's do another true false, all right? When teaching as a strategic scientist, eclecticism is desirable. True or false? All right. Eclecticism for the sake of just being eclectic, right? Let's just do a bunch of different things and that should help. That's false. All right. Gosh, you guys are making me feel a lot better about this. I think you guys are doing a good job. So let's take that 5-minute break and we'll come back at 6 o'clock and we'll start talking about outcomes and principles. Cece, don't you find that Cece's videos getting darker and darker? And you know what? This is weird, Cece. I got to tell you this. Your shirt. No, listen. Your shirt and your chair are the same color, so it looks like a floating head on your chair, right? So when you get up, it looks like your head's just floating around. It's kind of weird. All right. All right.
Okay, thanks.
All right, bathroom break.
Oh.
All right, let's get going. Okay, I did want to share this with you. Um, let's see, about 5 years ago, they did an analysis of verbal behavior and they did a status update on all of the research out there in verbal behavior. And I think there were some important things that I do like to share with our candidates here. Obviously, you are interested in learning about a science that is rooted in experimental research. And so I do think it's important for you to know that you're in good hands in this program. All right. And I want to make sure you realize that you're getting some good money, you're good bang for your buck here. So when we look at things that are really important to, you get published research, and that means you have validated outcomes. All right. So when we look at authors, the most prolific authors from 2005 to 2014, I'm sure you can see here pretty clearly that Dr. Greer is ranked #1. Okay. And it's like not even close. Okay. So that's important to know as kind of the developer of, I think, a lot of the things we use. And, one of the things that I think is really important about what we're trying to teach you here is that it's the comprehensive part. We're trying to draw from all of the validated research. That's what makes the comprehensive part in CABAS so important. No matter where you go or what you do after this, if you get that part, you can be able to plug in anything. And then if we take this a step further, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, okay? But again, I want you to know you're in a good place. The top 25 most cited verbal behavior articles ever. So a citation means people are reading it and they're identifying this and are using it in further research, okay? So 25, and let's look at the representation that our group has in here. At number 7, we have Robin Nuzola and Dr. Greer. At number 8, we have Dr. Greer, Lauren Stolfi, Mapi Chavez, and Christina Rivera, those of you that are doing auditory matching. At number 10, we have Janet Twyman. At number 15, you might know that bozo. At number 18, we have Carol Fiorelli and Dr. Greer. And at number 20, we have So-Young Yoon and Gina Bennett. So all of those people are from a CABAS program that has done, research that has been cited numerous times. So again, I'm just telling you that to reassure you that you're in a good place in terms of learning this stuff. That should give you some level of confidence. So you don't ask for your money back too soon. All right. Okay. So how many of you have worked with Christine Whitlow at St. Lillian? All right, a few people. So Christine went through this program and she did a really nice summary of one of the topics we have to share tonight. So we'll start off with that. There's some key points here. For each thing I'm sharing with you, I'm going to share with you 5 to 10 key points. And if you didn't get a chance to read these, that's what you want to train yourself to do. Every time you read something, leave with 5 to 10 key points. So tonight, I'm going to do it for you and not charge you for it. All right. Okay. Goal of effective instruction. Learn the content. Make sure we're teaching kids how to learn independently so they can become lifelong learners. Pretty simple, right? Principles of effective instruction. Hope none of these are too shocking for you. We need to make sure we state clearly what we are trying to teach. We need to make sure we are providing accurate and competent models. Many opportunities for active responding, immediate feedback as much as possible, self-pacing when appropriate, teaching to mastery, reinforcing accurate responding, and good measurement. Now, keep in mind that I think this is a good example of how the learning unit was developed. Frederick and Hummel identified these pieces, and these have all been kind of vetted through research. So this would be a great checklist to determine, at least on the surface, if you're providing effective instruction. There are 4 basic approaches of teaching that emanate from behavioral principles. And these are not the only ones, and there are multiple variations of these. I would become very familiar with each one of these. We have a few videos on these on the Moodle website. Precision teaching, which is about fluency and rate. Direct instruction, which is about making sure that we can take the learner from teacher-directed to student-directed. Programmed instruction, where everything is sequenced specifically for a purpose. And personalized system of instruction, where the learner teaches themselves. All right, so understanding those critical features, I think, are really important. These things and kind of unpacking each of these, really important. I'm not going to get into them. Dr. Shannon may share a lot of great things about the standard acceleration chart. That is what's used in precision teaching to teach the rate of learning, all right, or for you to measure rate of learning. Direct instruction relies on a lot of choral responding. Most lessons are scripted, but you have to know how to enhance those scripts. You can't just read in the book. And I'll send you some videos on the differences in, I guess, bringing to life direct instruction. And I think it's pretty amazing when you see that happen. All right, programmed instruction. I think we gave an example of that on the video, on one of your intro videos. You will see that there used to be something that was used called a teaching machine, and it presented things in terms of frames. That was the precursor to computer-aided instruction. All right. So I'm going to send this. I think this is a great slide to use to understand the different components of the basic types of behavior analytic instructional programming that exist. And I think that I've used this from time to time in order to help people understand those differences. So please make sure that you're familiar with these things, because these are things that the research is already there. There's lots of resources that you can play off of with this, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. All right. So that was your reading on outcomes and principles of effective instruction. Let's move on to one of my favorites, which is the shame of American education. Just breaks my heart to say that, okay? All right, let me see if I can find this. And of course, the file I'm looking for is never at my fingertips. Don't go anywhere yet. I'm not going to let you down just yet. We may pop over to another one. I'm the victim of too many files open right now. Okay, I think we will move on to the next one. We're going to skip over shame. We'll come back to it. We're going to go to imagine a teacher. All right. Always all these steps involved in transitioning things. So annoying. All right. So measure of a teacher. Now, those people that are working on Kabbage ranks, this was the seminal piece of information that kind of drove the way the Kabbage ranks were put together. There's a reason why they're put together in a certain way. So just keep in mind that even though we measure teacher behavior quite frequently, the types of measures we use are typically pretty subjective. And so when we look at research that has been conducted on that, it's really vague and very ambiguous. And there's kind of nothing we could put our finger on that really serves as something we can replicate. And that's a problem when you look at evidence. If you can't replicate it, it's of little or no good, right, to the professional. So this is where things like the TPRA come into play. But if we can measure how the teacher delivers learned units, then we could have actually a pretty solid measurement for cost-benefit analysis of education. What is it taking for a child to master an objective? How much did that cost? In all the schools that we work in, we can figure out how much one child learning one objective cost and how much it costs to deliver one learn unit. That is a very responsible way to report back to the taxpayer, right? Because we can then go into taxpayers or stakeholders and say, the kids in this classroom learned 3,024 objectives this year, and that cost the taxpayer $1.24 per objective. That's what a uniform measurement does for you. You do all kind of things with that. All right, so what we did is we started looking at research that told us different things. And a really important piece of research was by Wolpow in '76. And a lot of people were worried about on-task behavior at that time. And what the research revealed is that just because the child's on task doesn't necessarily equate to more learning. It's whether that on-task behavior is paired with learn units. That is the critical feature right there. So that all of this research and more is what we started putting together in order to come up with this comprehensive way of looking at schooling. That's where the TPRA came to be. And just think of the TPRA as a way to determine if what is being delivered is intact, scientifically sound, leading to new learning, and so on. It's an additional measure. It lets you know that you're delivering learn units. And look at that last bullet point. Even in an ideal public school situation with fully funded with certified teachers, there are still too few learn units that are being delivered. And that holds true in 1992 as well as today. And again, we're not always talking about teacher delivered learn units, all right? So that reading is what identified some of those pieces. All right, now let's shift to teacher as a strategic scientist. And this is really where I think some of the defining features of your ranks kind of come together. All right. Those of you that know anything about Hope Academy, the principal there, Linda Stone, she was in our program also, and she actually created this PowerPoint. So that's the one that I've selected to share with you today. I'm giving homage to our former students here. All right, share screen. All right, so think about this piece as kind of bringing it all together, okay? Aha, all right. So when we talk about the teacher as a strategic scientist, there are 3 different areas that constitute whether or not a teacher is behaving as a strategic scientist, right? Contingency shaped behaviors are those things that teachers will automatically do because they pretty reliably result in better outcomes. Let's talk about some of those things right now. Can you think of 3 things that should be contingency shaped for a teacher that's teaching from a strategic scientist perspective? 3 things that person's doing that's identifiable. I want you to post it in the chat. Three things, any 3. Lots of things. All I'm asking for is 3.
Wait, Dr. Gotro, I was actually sort of typing something. Could you repeat what you wanted us to do, please? I'm sorry.
So we're talking about what constitutes whether a teacher is teaching as a strategic scientist.
Oh,
And
thank you.
there are 3 different areas. One of those areas would be contingency shaped behaviors. Those are automatic behaviors that strategic scientist will do without even thinking about it. Okay, so just name me 3 things. Okay. Keep going. All right, everybody's contributing something. Okay. All right, excellent. Excellent. Okay, I think you guys are getting it, right? And if you want to even, keep it this simple, all right? And again, we're kind of going back to the basics of the Learn Unit, but you should not have to think about whether how you're presenting instruction is clear and unambiguous. Unambiguous delivery of antecedents should be automatic. You shouldn't have to think whether your antecedents are evoking a response. They should. You shouldn't have to think about consequating that response. You get one, you consequate it. There's no thinking involved. You shouldn't have to think about putting in a schedule of reinforcement. It should already be there. So Lauren's exactly right. Shouldn't have to think about whether you should be collecting data on this. You should already be doing it. All of the things you guys have listed, all of them, some are larger than others. How to make decisions, making decisions, not just going on indefinitely, doing the same thing over and over. You're 100% correct. Those are the things that should be automatic. And they don't always start off that way. Here's what I want you to think about contingency shaped with. When all of you get in your cars and you take off, all of those behaviors are contingency shaped. You are not verbally mediating through that. You're not saying, all right, I need to take the key. That's the thing with the long prong on the end. And nowadays, you don't even have that, right? I need to put that key in the ignition. I need to turn. You're not thinking about all of that. Those things are all automatic, right? they are contingency shaped because for the most part, when you put the key in and you turn it on, you turn the key, what typically happens? The car starts. When you press the accelerator, what typically happens? It moves forward. So your behaviors are shaped by the outcome that when you see a red light, you typically stop. Why? Because when you don't stop, you may run into somebody. So it's contingency shaped. Now, let's take that same behavior and put you on a highway in London. All of a sudden, you're going to shift from contingency shaped to verbally mediated because you got to think, I've got to, okay, wait, I've got to drive on this side. Now my steering wheel's on the other side. So I still have to keep my steering wheel towards the center. And what are you doing? When you're doing that, you're using the vocabulary of driving. It's not the science of driving, but if you don't share the same vocabulary, you're not talking about things that are the same like accelerator and brake and those types of things. So you're able to verbally mediate because you are sharing a common vocabulary. All right, so sometimes things change because parts of the environment change and the learn unit changes. So that's why on your CABA shrinks, there are sections in each module that talk about contingency shaped behaviors. You should be automatically delivering learn units. And that's put together in a way that all the pieces for each module should come together where each one you're getting better and better at as you go. All right, so here's some examples about contingency shape. Verbal behavior about the science is what you're learning in Cooper. It's what you're learning about your DTS quizzes. It's what you're learning in BDS. When you don't have you have not mastered the vocabulary of the science, it's going to be hard to have contingency shaped behaviors that you can tact, and it's going to be hard to verbally mediate to problem solve. That's why we say the two repertoires converge into verbal mediated teaching. You've got to have both pieces. So think about this one as problem solving. And you problem solve by being able to analyze the problem, tack the possible source of the problem, go to the literature to read about the problem, and then come back to the table to try to use what you've learned to solve that problem. And I want you to think about a surgeon, about a medical doctor. That's what they have to do. And all good scientists solve the problem that way. All right? And that's really, really important to understand. All right, let's see. I'm not going to go over this. We'll get to this. And here's what you want to think about. Each of you, in your own way, you need to be trying to replicate the most efficacious models that are in the literature that result in more student learning. That's what we try to create for you, that regardless of where you're going to head out to do this thing, that you're going to be able to take with you everything in your suitcase that will allow you to replicate the things in the literature that result in better learning for children. And that means that there's identifiable better teaching procedures. So, one of the things we talked about in that first chapter is that although there's been tons of research on learning, there's been very little research on effective teaching. And that is what behavior analysis brings to the table. It brings to the table a way to identify and determine the most effective components of teaching. And look, I just want to translate this into what is meaningful for me as a professional, and I hope that it's meaningful for you. Regardless of whether you're a clinician, a parent educator, a special ed teacher, a general ed teacher, your job is to teach. So for some of you people who are technicians that want to be BCBAs, your job is still to teach. That is what we call what you're doing, okay? Whenever you're arranging the environment such that the learner will acquire a new skill, you are teaching. And that is why it's so important to look at behavior analysis as a scientific way of teaching. Because as a behavior analyst, if your clients don't learn anything, you're going to be a crappy behavior analyst. And we're not going to produce those in this program. I can assure you of that. All right. I think we are at the end of our time slot here, and we pretty much kind of got to everything that I wanted to get to tonight. So let's go back and ask another question. All right. First of all, does anybody have an idea where those questions that I'm asking are coming from?
Our quiz.
Yeah. So I'm kind of trying to give you a little bit of momentum. If you hadn't started to tackle it, that it's going to be a little bit less aversive to actually do so. Okay. All right. So let me ask this question. What should teachers use to make decisions about which tactics are best for students at any given instructional decision point? What should teachers use to make decisions about which tactics are best for students at any instructional decision point? That's the operative piece right there. You got to look at something. What are you going to look at? There's one thing that if you don't look at it, you're not going to be able to make a decision. In the form of what, Taylor? That can come in many forms. Graphical data. You need a graph to look at to determine what you're going to do. You have just raw data, you cannot do that. You have a checklist, you cannot do that. You have a test at the end of the week you've given, you cannot do that. You need graphical data on the thing it is that you're trying to make a decision on. All right? All right. I want to ask more. All right. Amuse me and let me ask another question. All right. If you find a student is having difficulty doing a task and you break that task down into 3 component parts, what constitutes a learn unit there? So if you find that a student is having difficulty doing a task and you break that task down into 3 component parts, what would constitute a learn unit? Each component. So how many would there be in that example? Yeah, okay. All right, good. All right, so I think we're getting somewhere. I feel pretty confident about where you are. You should be able to tackle that first DTS quiz pretty nicely. I think you should feel comfortable about it when you're reading it. And let that be the measure. All right, yes, Taylor, send those to your mentors first. Don't worry about when it's in Moodle, get it to them first. We'll get it, you'll get directed after that. Just take it slow. Here's what my challenge is for you. If you take that first quiz and you struggle with it, I want you to be honest with me about that. And I want you to reach out, because I want to spend more time with you privately. And I remember when I took this quiz, I kind of spun myself into butter, and I went to Dr. Cohane and I just said, I think I'm done. I think I can't do this. I'm struggling. I thought I got the aha moment last semester, but I think I'm back to square one again. I'm struggling. And she gave me some good advice. And I kind of decided at that point, I need to get out of my own way. Okay, because I had come into the program after I had been supervisor of special ed in a school district. So I had taught for 17 years, and I was a SPED director, and everybody at that point was talking about retirement, and here I am pressing the reset button. I was like the grandpa of our cohort. It was not the time where you start learning a new science, that's for sure. But would I change anything? Absolutely not. And look, I have to tell you this, that I attribute 100% of that success to Dr. Cohane. I mean, she was the complete and utter person that got me there. And it was not easy at all. And Dr. Greer, of course, but Dr. Cohane was my practicum supervisor. So, and we were in a middle school for incarcerated youth. So all of the children we worked with were in prison, jailed, those types of things. And, when we talked about surviving the day, it was, oh my God, did you see that guy with this weapon? He had like a gun, and we survived the whole day without him shooting us. Great. That was wonderful. I'll never forget one time Dr. Cohane was observing my class, and I had devised this wonderful Jeopardy game for my students. And it was a Jeopardy game about history. So they had to pick a square, and then when I pulled off the square, there was a math problem. So to figure out how many points there was, they had to do the math problem. So that was the motivational operation of my Learn unit, right? And I was so worried about that. And I never noticed, but one of my really bad kids found a broom and started goosing one of my other students with the broom in the middle of the whole lesson. And here I am worried about, oh my God, will he get 1,000 divided by 3? And that's how many points. And Dr. Cohane's just watching this student get goose with the broom. And she's like, Grant, you can't let that happen. You can't let the child goose the other child with the broom. And I was like, oh, I can't. Okay. I'm doing planned ignoring, Dr. Cohane. She goes, that's not the answer for everything, Grant. And so that was a defining moment, like, oh my God, I've got to do 2 things at the same time. It's not just. And then about 2 weeks after that, she's like, well, I'll come in for another TPRA. All right. We're not going to count this one. So I was working with an 8th grader who had never read a word in his life, and would look at a word like boat and would say ocean. And he would look at the word horse and say farm, because they freaking taught him a multi-sensory approach, and he was not under the control of the letters. So my immediate mentor, so remember this, I went from being special ed director in Dallas to being a paraprofessional in a classroom where my supervisor was a 22-year-old young Kathy Minky Matthews, who had never really worked very much in her life, but she was in the doctoral program. And I remember Dr. Cohen telling me, we'll let you in this program, but will you be able to take instruction from a 22-year-old female? And I was like, lady, with the amount of money I'm paying for this, I will take instruction from anybody. All right. So I get in there. And so I went from obviously making a pretty good salary as special ed director to Dr. Gurr telling me, yeah, I don't care what you're doing, but you got to give up all of that, move to New York, live in Manhattan, drive an hour and a half to your practicum site and make $11,000 a year as a para. Okay, that's what you have to do. You got that? All right, if you can do that, you could come in. So I'm doing all of this. Kathy, talk about underestimating someone. She works with this student a couple of times, gets some data, and she says, the child's under the wrong stimulus control. She devised this program for a child to read. I'll start running it with them. Dr. Cohen comes in. She's doing the TPRA. The child reads for the first time. So this is a guy who has spent the last 9 months in jail, all right? Families, drug dealers, slept in a car, comes to us. The school had been through 9 different models in 1 year. We come in there to set up the show. Dr. Cohen's doing a TPRA on me. The child reads for the first time. I look down at his paper that he's reading and it's wet. And I realize he's crying on the paper. All right. So I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God. I'm like, at that time, I think I was like 37 years old. I'm like, all these years I've tried to teach kids. I thought I was teaching them. This is like the first time I think I've taught somebody something. This is it. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm learning all of this. I've done it. I've arrived. And Dr. Cohen looks at me and she's like, Grant, that's fantastic, but you did not take any data. So we have no proof that the child learned to do anything. All right. And I was like, darn, last time I let a kid get goosed. This time I take no data. What am I doing here? So sometimes I'm not trying to bore you to death, but I just think it's important for us to share with you. We were in your shoes at one time. We did not go through this without having to experience everything you're having to experience. And, you know, with maybe the science being a little less evolved as what it is right now. So anyway, that's kind of my share. If you need to speak with me privately, I will certainly be available for the rest of the evening. So just set something up with me and we'll take it from there. Otherwise, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, okay? You see Dr. Shaman next week. Bye, guys.